Thank you everyone for joining us whenever and wherever you're watching from. Welcome to the conversation based here in Newport. And what we're going to do, we're just going to have an open conversation with a few of us joining us here this evening. So we've got Abby on the call, we've got Tamika on the call, we've got Kyle, and we've got Fumi. I'll be hosting. My name is Freddie. So yeah, thank you for joining. Today's conversation is on racism. So it's been a topical issue over the last few months, with things happening in America, and then protests happening, and just a lot of discussions and debates on what the issue is, what the issue is like, and discussions on how do we solve some of the issues that we still have in society regarding racism. So what we're planning to do today is just cover some key themes or some key ideas or topics within racism, in terms of how the media has handled it, how we think the media has handled it, also our experiences with having this conversation, which isn't always an easy conversation to have with friends and family, and then finally we'll touch on some resolutions or what we think might help the situation to kind of heal from racism in our societies. So hopefully you'll stick around for the conversation. The first thing we're going to cover is racism in 2020. What does it look like? And we'll start off with Tamika.
I'd say racism in 2020 looks like something that's been trying to be concealed. I feel like it's something that we think that it's dead. A lot of people think that it doesn't exist as much, it's not as much of a serious issue, but I think it's something that's very, very under the surface, whereas before I think it used to be something that was quite obvious. I think now it's something that's a lot more subtle, but yeah, very much still existing. I think it's something that does need to be addressed, because it's years and years of oppression, that I just think that needs to be sort of unveiled. All those layers need to be unveiled. I think we've just masked over it for years and years and nothing's really been dealt with, and I think that's in regards to black people, and I think that's in regards to white people, all races, and I just think it's something that we probably just need to look at and educate ourselves on, so that we can sort of try and find a solution to live together in harmony and in a lovely, equal and kind and loving way.
And there's so many aspects to this, and we'll get to sort of discussing, our experiences with racism, whether we've seen it, whether we've experienced it ourselves. But how does racism make you feel in our society? We'll go to Abby. Abby, do you have anything to share in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, for me, obviously being white, I think right now it's realising how much of an impact the white privilege has, and how much of an effect on society it has. I mean, I'm a mum to a little boy of mixed heritage, and so I've got personal concerns about how racism affects our day-to-day life, the choices that I make for him. I mean, what school he's going to go to, the places that we even go, even as a toddler, I have to be conscious. And I think, as Tamika said, I mean, there's so many people who are, it comes in so many layers. So many people are unaware of even the effect and the impact, and even the history that racism comes along with. So yeah, for me it's a really, really mixed bag that needs addressing in so many ways. And I have felt it in certain ways already, just from having friends and now family who are of different cultures, living in a British society and living in the current world.
Yeah, it's crazy that you have to think about which school to take to get them into, and you already, and this issue is real in that choice.
Yeah.
Kyle, what about you? So I guess in talking of maybe whether we've seen racism happen or even experienced it ourselves in a very new and sort of subtle way. What about you? Can you share anything in that space?
Yeah, so it's coming from a white British male. I don't have any other races in my family really, other than some sort of Mediterranean, which you talked about in my father's side, but I don't really know. It's for me, it's been really eye-opening in that really having to take a hard look in the mirror at white privilege and kind of going at just those conversations, to be honest, with friends and family after the George Floyd horrific thing that happened. I've seen the different conversations of some people were very obviously saddened by it, but then some people, the approach was almost to fight against it and almost justify what happened. I remember having a conversation with someone and it was kind of like, well, he was a criminal. And it's like, even so, even if he was the worst criminal, it doesn't matter. And like, as we've seen countless times, it wouldn't have happened that way if that was a white criminal. And kind of just seeing that kind of own white privilege in my own life, kind of going, you know what, I don't have to wake up every day and worry if someone's going to judge me by the color of my skin. That's never been a thought. And I think that's one of the biggest things where people struggle with that term of white privilege, of kind of going, well, I didn't ask for it. Well, it's like, no, you didn't. And that's kind of the epitome of privilege, isn't it?
That's my question. So I'm finding now that a lot of white people are having an issue with the word white privilege. Do you guys have an issue with that, or what's your thoughts on that term?
I think privilege is that thing that you didn't ask for or didn't work for, or privilege is just something that is just handed to you. And I think, like my friend Adrian, he absolutely amazing, beautiful person. And he was talking to me about some of the situations he's gone through, and I'm like, I wouldn't even have to think about that in my own life. And I think that is privilege. Like, not like the fact that I don't have to think of it is the privilege. We said in our kind of catch up the other day, I'm not apologizing that I'm white. It's just more because I think that gets into another whole realm of stuff that it just pulls out hatred and things like that. But it's more not apologizing for being white, but looking at this systemic white privilege that I've grown up with and kind of going, that's not okay. And I think the more it's revealed, hopefully, the more it will dissipate.
Yeah. So it's rather more a case of owning it rather than getting offended by it.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, definitely. I think it's being able to say, okay, what are we now capable of doing to make things right and get that level of equality happening. It's about educating, I think, the every generation, actually educating them to understand the ignorance and the awareness, and making it something that people now understand on every level, so that, like Kyle said, that it can eventually become nothing, and it's not about the age-old I don't see color, because that is also, I understand, disrespectful. It's about embracing cultures, but it's about not making them an issue.
Yeah.
I think that's a fascinating sort of question, and I think I guess overall it's the acknowledgement that that in our society, people are treated differently on the basis of color, and I think the first step to that is kind of acknowledging that it does happen, and hopefully, these type of conversations help kind of bring our awareness to a healthy state where we can kind of make progress in kind of making a change, whether it's at a local level or beyond. So, Kyle, you mentioned there sort of George Floyd, and that was a large catalyst to the recent movements and protests and kind of the awareness that has grown over the last couple of months on systemic racism in the US and the UK. and within all that, there's been this movement called Black Lives Matter. What do you know about that? I'll go to Mika for this. What do you know about Black Lives Matter and its impact on the anti-racist?
Well, I'm gonna be honest, because I feel like that's what we're here to do, and I feel like it's really important to have an honest conversation. Like, none of us are historians, none of us are activists actively, although what we're doing now can be seen as, you know, in that sort of walk or that sort of platform. But I'm just speaking honestly from the heart, and that's what we're all here to do. Is, you know, we haven't, you know, delved into a lot of information in regards to it, and I think that's what most people in the public have done. It's just a case of ordinary people. We're not historians. We're not anything like that, and it's the case of, well, what do people? Well, what's the normal conversation that people have? Normal people aren't going to be like, I've read 5,000 books. I've watched 5,000 documentaries. I've done all this, and I've researched into this. And it's the same with me. But what I have seen and what I have heard is that the Black Lives Matters is an organisation which sort of helps to, it wants to abandon inequalities and fight for justice against injustices and things like that. But there are a lot of controversies that I've realised now since the whole George Floyd thing that have come about. So I'm kind of in two minds about it, and I think, you know, we don't have to go underneath an organisation. We just have to go from the heart. What is right and what is wrong? How should people be treated, and how shouldn't people be treated? And that should be the movement. It's just sort of what's right, what's wrong, and go with that. And I think then that takes away the politics of it, and it takes away the, you know, whether or not people are doing it for money, whether or not people are doing it for the government, or, you know, it takes away the conspiracy theories. Let's just be kind to each other. Let's just be loving to each other. Let's respect each other, you know, and go from there. That's what I think. Black Lives Matters, in essence, regardless of where it stems from and the conspiracy theories that arrive from it, I think it's been very great in opening up the conversation and the dialogue for us to have this platform and use this platform. It has to be given credit for that, regardless of whatever it's. But I'm just constantly thinking, you know, there is a need for change. There is a need for us to fight together against racism and against inequalities. And I'm just for that, really.
Yeah.
And also, Black Lives Matter is a statement, isn't it? And it just so happens that there's an organisation that's called itself Black Lives Matter, and it's all of a sudden behind all this movement.
Yeah.
But I think, yes, it's good. It's important that we don't get distracted by kind of the politics of it, as you say, in terms of who the organisation. But actually, there is a deeper issue, and at the end of the day, Black Lives Matter is a statement that that many of what we're trying to do is kind of make people aware that actually it's a statement that we support, and it's a statement that we're raising awareness.
Exactly, and I feel like as well, what we have to try and get away from is trends. Social media makes everything so trendy, which is why we're doing what we're doing now, is because it takes action. So it's all great having a sort of a movement and things like that, but if nothing's getting done, it's pointless. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's important to step away from the trends sometimes and do actions rather than words and things like that. So yeah.
So Black Lives Matter is a very sort of I guess a new kind of layer to racism and how and how people are reacting to the systemic racism in our societies. But I'm going to go to you next, and I kind of want to go into sort of history and sort of ask what historical reasons do you think have contributed to the racism we see today?
Well, I think it's easier for people to talk about slavery and slave ships and things like that. I think the main thing that we see is the disparity between different ethnic groups in their progression and their kind of successes within education, within opportunities for work, and even within healthcare as well. So, for example, within healthcare, when we look at the jobs of, for example, doctors, if, for example, different doctors, when we look at everything that's happened within COVID-19, there was a significant disparity between ethnic groups, and particularly BAME, which is an interesting term, which I don't really like using as much anymore as I've read a bit more into it. But as we can see, a lot more healthcare professionals from those backgrounds, even though they were a smaller percentage working in healthcare, a lot of them died. And it was just, it brings into question that what kind of positions were they in, what kind of jobs were they doing, what kind that made them, even though there aren't that many of them, but for so many of them to die. And it brings up a question. I know some of the statistics from the Brace report that was recently produced, it suggested that, for example, if me or Abby were to have a baby right now, that I'm 5 times more likely to die than Abby is within the UK. And that's not just because of a genetic, or maybe like genetic factors, for example. That's actually maybe due to the care or the education that someone's maybe had to be able to support me over Abby. And I think, obviously the UK is amazing, like we are so blessed to have the NHS, but just that small example shows that we've come a long way, but there's still so much to be done. And I think those, it's not just historical, it's just the fact that they are still happening, and just trying to look at how can we make things better. It's not trying to point the finger, and it's just trying to grow. If someone is hurting within my family, we're all hurting. And I think within the UK, it's not just about pointing finger and saying, oh, this is an issue, I hate the UK. No, if it's your own house, you're going to do some DIY because you want to make it better. And I think that's what this whole situation is. Like, you'll point out, oh, that needs to get fixed, or that needs to get fixed, because you want the whole house to be wonderful and excellent. And I think that's what this kind of conversation is to look at and see how history has kind of transcended time, and it's still affecting us, even in a microcosm and macrocosms of today.
No, that's really, that's
I think it was interesting. Sorry, I think it was interesting what you said before, Fumi, when we had our catch up in regards to how the medical profession, how they diagnose problems. So if they've got, if someone's got a bruise or something like that, like they don't know how to identify things on Black people, which is astounding. Considering you're treating somebody and you don't know what to look out for. I think that's amazing, and I feel like that's definitely something that needs to change, especially when the statistics show that more of us are dying, and the likelihood of us. Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Definitely, a lot of the medical teaching with regards to, like, for example, something really like skincare, like dermatology, and even with regards to something like, for example, certain types of presentations tend to be about the white male, not even necessarily the white female as well. So even, and then not even to talk about someone that is from a darker or BAME group, minority ethnic group. So for a lot of the textbooks have focused on a white man presents with certain skin complaints, or if someone maybe looks red, or if someone is blue, how can you tell if they're not really breathing very well? How can you tell if this person is struggling to breathe? And what that means, unfortunately, is that if someone's jaundiced and they've got like, if they look like me, it might be a very late stage of a disease, which could be basically a death sentence. But if someone was maybe British and white, you'd be able to see the yellowness straight away. Maybe something will be able to be done sooner. So it's just a matter of fact that the medical schools, some of them are trying to re-educate themselves and not just look at how the skin is presenting, but how can you tell other signs and symptoms without just focusing on the skin color, or focusing on how a man, for example, would present. Because women, for example, when a man's having a heart attack, typically it would be like left-sided shoulder pain, but and shooting down the arm. But a woman might actually have back pain, for example. So it's just kind of like those little things, but they make such a big difference.
Yeah.
And being able to identify that, because you could save someone's life, and you don't know who. If it's like one person in a family, that could be a dad looking after 5 kids, that's maybe someone's mum, and that they've only got one child to look after, or they're a carer. And it's just showing like the importance of how we're all in this together, basically.
Yeah. It's kind of, without being negative, and I don't want to sound negative, but in a sense it is kind of neglectful to not be able to identify those.
Yeah.
It's massively neglectful.
100%.
That's blown my mind. I did not know that was a thing. And that I don't understand. But it's not as if we're a solely 100% white country, and then someone else from another ethnic background has walked in the country, and we go, oh, we don't know how to deal with this. Like,
I've been in a situation at work where a GP has called another GP and said, actually, there's a black child that's come in for their 6-week check. I don't know how to examine a black child. Can you do it instead? And it's just that kind of, obviously the anatomy and physiology, everything is the same. But I think, first of all, obviously that doctor, they said the truth because they felt out of their depth. But I've also had doctors after the George Floyd incident saying to me that they actually had to review themselves, and they actually realized that they didn't really know that much about black skin, and they've had to just retrain themselves. And even not just white doctors, black doctors as well. And it's that kind of situation that, what are we actually taught in medical school? And that transcends to healthcare, that transcends to education, that transcends to the message that it's given. I've been told by a doctor, when a doctor was asked that there's a baby, if a baby comes in with bruising, for example, and it's maybe a questionable case of maybe there's domestic abuse of a child, and if you're not really confident about looking at a bruise, would that be negligent if you didn't identify the bruise because the skin was darker? And the doctor, who's also a consultant, made the comment that, well, if you can't see the bruise, you wouldn't be negligent or be able to be accused of negligence because you couldn't see it or couldn't identify it because it was on darker skin. So that kind of blew my mind a bit, because if a child is being abused and because you're not competent, or you don't have that education or that knowledge, that child, you could leave that child to be killed. And when we think of cases like Victoria Climbié, who was abused and she ended up dying, and she was seen by so many healthcare professionals, so many social workers, and it took how many years for this poor little girl to die, and something could have been done. So it just draws the question that we can do much better. We can do so much more.
That's
kind of
brilliant.
Sorry, Freddie.
No, sorry.
It's like, for me, that just really points out the magnitude of how systemic it is. If it's not in education for doctors, like for our NHS, so what, like that's purposefully not been put in there.
Yeah, and it poses the question as to why.
Yeah.
What you think, well, why? So okay.
So for me, you've given some really sort of practical examples of how we can make a difference or start to make a difference. You've highlighted some issues, at least in the medical profession, where there are gaps in people's knowledge and in professional doctors' knowledge, where there is room for improvements. What about in other areas? So I know we've got Kyle, you're in drumming and music. I don't know what some of the what Abby and Tamika are in. But what about in our workplaces, for example, and Abby as well? What in our workplaces is there more things we can do as well to kind of maybe grow this awareness? So Fumi's given some great examples. What about everyone else?
I think it would be really interesting. I think personally, like I've worked in quite a few companies, and I've noticed that there's always a sort of like in your induction, there's always a process where you'll go through equality, and you'll go through like how to speak to people and how to speak to certain people that have certain sexual orientations or certain people of a certain demographic. But I've noticed that when it comes to race, if it even happens at all, it's very, very small. And I think it's very important for people. I think it should be something that's taught in the workplace as an induction. This is how you communicate with somebody. This is because there's so many different offences that could happen. That, for example, like Black people, our hair, for some reason, people like to touch our hair. People like to say, oh, is that real? Or is that, and they will touch as they go along. I've never walked up to somebody that I didn't know of a different colour to me or any colour and stroked them and asked them if their hair is thing. It doesn't personally offend me because I'm just like, I will say, just take your hands out of my hair. But there are people that do get offended by it because it's kind of patronising, because you just wouldn't do it to other people, but for some reason it feels like it's okay to do it to us and our kids, because it's happened. Like my daughter's mixed race, so she's got curly hair, so people will be like, oh, her hair's beautiful, which it is. But if I walked up to their blonde-haired child, being a Black woman, and stroked their kids' heads and said their hair is beautiful, I'm not too sure that it would be perceived in the same way. So there is a kind of quote unquote slave mentality to that, like it's okay for it to happen to me because I am black and therefore a lesser. And if I was to dare to do that to somebody else, then I would be, it would be problematic because I would be seen as a threat. Because
yeah, it could be accused of assault as well. So yeah, I do have a problem with it, particularly in COVID times. You do not untouch me. No, there's like personal space, personal boundaries. I'm not here for you to touch. Like I literally freeze like a statue, because if I was to release my inner self, heaven and hell would come out, and I do not want to get arrested. So it's just like, no, please don't do it. It's not okay. I just like need to take a moment when it happens sometimes and just like, thank you, Jesus, amen. Yeah, that's all I can say.
And it's ignorance. It all boils down to ignorance. Sometimes it's not even from a place of malice. It's almost like generational ignorance, where it seems that it's okay for that to happen. But just, you know, we don't like it. We don't like it to our kids. We didn't like it as a kid, and we generally don't like it as an adult. I suppose it depends on who it is. But if it's a stranger, yeah, I would just say don't touch it. Please.
Does it happen quite frequently?
Sorry?
Does that happen quite frequently?
Yeah,
my little boy's hair is always the topic of discussion.
yeah.
In a supermarket. I actually experienced my first encounter of ignorant racism from an older guy. The conversation started about my little one's hair, and he actually went on to comment how he had hair like that once, but his all fell out. And I went, well, I'm sure his won't. Like, because I always tried to counteract anything, and there wasn't, I mean, race wasn't even into that situation at that point of the conversation, but I always try and counteract things with a positive, because I'm not going to want to like welcome that into his paradigm, like my little boy's paradigm. And this elderly chap went, oh well, he's a Bob Marley boy, and I was literally stunned, and he repeated it, and I was in such a position where I was like, okay, I want to try and educate this man right now. May it fall on deaf ears. My little boy's running out of the supermarket, so there was only so much that I could actually stop to say at the time. And yeah, I was just like, wow, that situation in itself, just, you know, the hair touching is on one level, and then for comments like that, to be able to come from that with absolutely no awareness that that is even really just not okay.
Let's just point out he doesn't have dreadlocks, the little boy, so it's not even like
and again, that's another point as well, how we could even, you know, that was just such a massive stereotypical attachment put on him. Like there was nothing to even associate him to that, as you're saying, Tam, you know?
It's just like one throwaway comment from someone who was just being extremely ignorant could have a massive response in a young person's mind.
And I said to Abby when she told me at the time, I was like, it's funny because it's when you check someone's heart, like, you know that it's not coming from a place of malice, it's coming from a place of ignorance. And that's where education is, because there's a difference, isn't there? If someone walking up to somebody and saying the N-word or this, that and the other, or, you know, whatever, that's coming from a place of malicious intent. Whereas this person, it's just ignorance. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations and for people to hear these conversations, so they know that they can say, okay, well, I know that that's not okay. Because how else? Because I've got best friends that are white. All my best friends are predominantly white. And, you know, when all this stuff with Black Lives Matter and things happened, you know, it was difficult for us to have this conversation. These are girls that I've been friends with since I was like 12, 13. And they were like, we just didn't know what to say. So if we can't have that conversation with best friends, and you don't have any black friends, how are you going to be able to have this conversation? So it's really just important to highlight people's ignorance, but not in a negative place. Like, it's not, we're all ignorant to something in some rights. Does that make sense? Like, I'm not familiar a lot with the Asian cultures. I would be ignorant if I went over there and I carried on whatever. Do you know what I mean? So it's not a problem. Being ignorant isn't a problem. not being willing to learn and to sort of counteract that ignorance is the problem.
Yes.
And an important source of information is in sort of aiding our trying to hopefully counteract our ignorance is the media. But of course, it itself has a lot of bias, and people. I know sometimes we only listen to the stuff we want to hear, so maybe we'll pick up the newspaper or social media pages that we like and make us feel good, and that in itself kind of creates an almost a vacuum, but we're not listening to new ideas and other people's ideas, and we kind of close ourselves off. So that leads on to kind of the next topic that we kind of want to discuss, and it's like the impact of the media and how it's handled, or how we think it's handled this sort of racism conversation, this conversation on racism and the issues around that in our society. So I'll go to Carl for this. How do you think the media have handled sort of or reported racism, both new and in the past?
One-sided is probably and ignorant, to be honest. I think the biggest thing that really caught my eye was two headlines, and I didn't actually see them in the paper, but it popped up on, I think I was probably on Instagram or something, but it popped up with two headlines, and one was when lockdown was slightly starting to ease, and there was like the beaches were starting to get jam-packed, and the headline, I am paraphrasing, but the headline was something like hundreds or thousands of people go and enjoy the lockdown restrictions being lowered at the beach and finally being able to have fun or whatever. And then there was a headline from the protests, and it was polar opposites, and it was people gathering, putting people's lives at risk. And there is no difference. People are, like, if you're looking at it from a COVID point of view of we need to protect people, then both headlines should be the same. If you're looking at like from a freedom act of like, oh, they can go to the beach now, they can protest now, it should have been the same. And it's just, it was, I couldn't believe it. And it was the same paper.
Yeah.
And
I think that's the thing with the protests, isn't it? I think there was a lot of negative press when it came to the protests, and I couldn't understand why I think what people, this is what I would say having the conversation, is people, for some reason, it was such a bad thing because of COVID and this, that and the other, and I get the spread of COVID and I get the virus and I get how people would have presumed that, or could have been even correct in thinking so, but the one thing that I think that the general public didn't see and don't understand, maybe because of white privilege, maybe because of ignorance, is the fact that people are willing to risk their lives for this because it's such a serious issue.
Yeah, it's completely different.
It's completely different in regards to going to the beach. You can do that at any time. The fight for race and equality, 400 years in, we're still trying to get in the medical profession, still trying to get in the education, we're still trying to get our history taught correctly. And it's kind of like, it's a cause. It's not just something we choose to do this morning because we're bored.
Yeah.
It's a constant fight for us for hundreds of years. So yeah.
So how could we do better? I'll go to Fumi for this. So how, from your perspective, how could the media do better in reporting racism in our society or these events?
Well, with regards to these events, I think the media is meant to be neutral, but it isn't. Obviously, they're different sources and things like that. But I think it's just about representation. I think also if you look at who are the authors, who are the people that are maybe bringing out this message, who have been able to get both sides of the story, and it's just trying to get things that are balanced. Yes, people are going to the beach, but then people are protesting. I think one of the best things about being British and Britishness is the fact that you can go out and you can protest. Peaceful protests are like the most British ways to say, like, oh my goodness, I'm not happy with this. Even look with the A-level results, there are students on the streets of London protesting, calling our Prime Minister certain names that I can't repeat. And then other people are protesting because they just want better opportunities. It's not saying that I want something that I haven't worked for. It's that, hey, if well, obviously that study was done where they had different applications, like one pile had British names, one pile had foreign names, and exactly the same CVs, but then the ones that had more British names were the ones that got the job. And it's not like, sometimes you can be overqualified for the job, and it's just, I just want the same opportunity as you. And it's about acknowledging that somebody might come from a different background, but they might be able to bring something, a different perspective. They bring a richness, and that's what makes us completely British. And I think that's something that media outlets need to look into. Who are you hiring? Who's telling the spin on the story? What is the spin of the story? How can you make it something that unifies the country rather than divides us? I think that's kind of the main thing that we need to look at. There's so many bad news, so much bad news around. But I did find it interesting that obviously the protests happened, everybody was saying we're going to get COVID, and then there were certain more far-right groups that went and protested, and it was described as a gathering of men who were there just literally drinking lots of alcoholic beverages and being really antisocial towards the police. And obviously I think even within the protest some of that might have happened, and some of the scenes have showed that some people did get out of hand, but it's just report on both sides.
And it's language, isn't it? It's just using the language, it's reporting things in a fair manner, using the correct language, not demonizing people. Because are they predominantly racist? Are the media racist? Or are they just looking to sell papers? You know, we've seen the whole Be Kind movement and things like that. There should be something that happens that's put in place. You know, they should be regulated. They shouldn't be able to misreport and write false stories to sell papers. They shouldn't be able to be biased. And, you know, I think that it would be a great call for them to be regulated more stringently so that they avoid doing this. Because, you know, when it affects people and it influences people, you know, they should be held accountable for it.
I think like what is the reason for whatever the article is? It's kind of what is the reason for this article? Is it a political reason? Is it, or like anything? But I think the media needs to report from a place more of compassion, because I think if it comes from a place of compassion, then you're more likely to have articles that will be less biased. Even just looking at the riots, and like so many articles where the riots are bad, the riots are bad, the riots are bad, and then all you see is political leaders saying, these riots are bad, these people will be prosecuted, da 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 da. And no one needs to hear that riots are bad. Everyone knows that rioting is not a fundamentally good thing.
And rioting wasn't a new thing that was brought around in 2020 by black people.
Like you don't need to go to someone and go, oh, by the way, rioting and violence isn't good. Well, we know this. But it's to look at the heart and go, okay, where's this anger coming from? And I think that's even outside of this racial conversation, any sort of act that you're seeing, it all comes from pain and loss and anger, and to look at that.
It's a movement for change, isn't it?
But to look at that first, I know from personal experience with friends or people that I've been in contact with in my life who have not been acting the best or made stupid decisions, and pointing at what they're doing and saying, you shouldn't be doing this, that doesn't help. It's saying, okay, where is this act coming from? Why are you so angry? And looking at the core of it and the reason behind those actions. That's the only compassionate way to report against this stuff, I think.
People write about football after football matches, after World Cups, after like when we win. Like it's amazing because people get so passionate about rioting and things like that, and obviously it's just kind of, as you said, look at the motive. I think that's the main point.
Definitely.
I kind of want to go into the next couple of topics, which is friends and family. So instead of having sort of them separately, I'm going to try and sort of conflate them into one. So I guess in general, the people around us affects the way we think, the way we act, the way we behave. And during this time, I'm sure we've had conversations with friends and families around us. So it's interesting. It would be interesting to kind of hear your experiences in having these conversations with them. Again, it's not an easy conversation to have. We all have different views. So I'll start off with Abby, if I can. So in terms of the conversations you've had, what have they been like with friends and family?
Yeah, sure. So for me, my parents are older. My grandparents are from the war generation, and I've personally had, I've actually disowned my own grandfather because of racism. Purely because I think when you become a parent, you're so protective over your child, you will literally do anything that you need to make their world a better place. And for me, not wanting that sort of negative influence, or wanting anyone, I know you can't put them in a bubble, but you try to put them in a bubble as much as possible. So for me, everything about this is all centered towards my little one, and obviously his future, because that's how we act as human beings, don't we? I mean, you know, you can be the most selfless person, but when it comes to your children, you put them up there. So that was the first issue that I had, even before all of the you know, the George Floyd and all the Black Lives Matter movement started. And I think going on to trying to educate my parents is being quite challenging. And they've tried to challenge the education that I've been trying to bring to them. Again, because of the way that the world in which they have grown up in, and you know, you can't be mad at people for that, because it's just what they've been exposed to. And I guess if you've never experienced something, again, it goes to white privilege. If you've never had to deal with something like that yourself, it's not something that you really have that much awareness about or education, unless you're just generally interested in that topic. And I think the same thing is actually spanned over to friends of mine who have no real personal concerns in their life. I've got sort of a mixed bag of friends, and there are a certain few who have just been very much like, I'm putting my shutters down on you even trying to have this conversation, like sending sort of sign this petition out, no response, and things like that. And yeah, it's hurtful, but equally it's eye-opening. And I think it just comes down to humanity and how we are as human beings. We have, I think, naturally that sort of selfish gene, which takes a lot of energy to counteract. So yeah, for me, it's very much a thing, and it's something that I like really try to educate myself on, for the empowerment of you know, ethnic minorities going forward, because I want the people in my world to be educated about these things, because I want that positive energy around me and in my life and my little boy's life.
Yeah. And that really hits home. Again, it's making it real when you're having to make these decisions on who, especially for you and your little boy, like who's around them and who's kind of influencing them. It's a real, again, it's hitting home how real, you know, these decisions are, and how racism is a part of that decision. What about yourself, Tamika? What about your experiences with these conversations?
I was going to say something, because going back to what Abby said about the friend situation, my friends as well, it was like, it was different. It was different. You know, people don't know what to say. They don't know how to say it. And even like my best friend, she reached out to me and she was like, Tam, I just didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to bring this conversation up. And this is like my day dot friend, do you know what I mean? And I'm like, cool, I get it, but I, as a black person, can't see how difficult it would be to see somebody suffering that's close to you and not be able to say anything. I think there's a lot of different reasons why people do that, and I think it's that thing of shame and blame. Like I feel like white people sometimes carry that guilt, and it's like, it's not anything that we want to project. Like, we're not blaming current white people for what happened 400 years ago. Does that make sense? Like, which is why we're having this conversation now. My dad is my stepdad is white. Well, he's my dad, he's not my stepdad, but just so you know, obviously, because I'm full black. So he's white. My daughter is mixed race. So we are a multicultural family. And I just think it's just really important to be able to have that conversation for people to be aware that there is a lot of racism still out there, and we do need to have the conversation if we want to make a change. But what I was going to say is, one person that reached out to me was Kyle and his wife during this pandemic. So Kyle and I go back years back, but we now go to different churches and things like that. So for Kyle to reach out to me on Facebook and say, hi Tam, how are you and Aaliyah? You know, like, we're thinking of you, blah, 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 in light of what happened. It was lovely, and it was really like confusing at the same time, because I'm like, wow, how can this white male reach out to me that's not very close to me, but other people find it difficult? So like, that is literally a question I want to put back to you guys, to Abby and to Carl, is in like, what do you think, what is that reason? Why do some people feel so why is it so hard for them to converse about something that is blatantly not right?
In my experience, it's the term of the elephant in the room, isn't it? People, like, you don't want to throw yourself into a conversation that I think it all boils down to, as I keep going back to, like, you know, just naturally occurring human traits of, you don't want to put yourself into an uncomfortable situation that maybe you're not educated about, you're possibly guilty of, because it probably doesn't make people feel good. People do things to feel good, don't they, typically? And I think 9 times out of 10, it's probably that it's uncomfortable, and there's an element of that ignorance. If it doesn't affect me, then I don't want to put myself on the line. That is the interpretation that I get. Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, I think it is definitely that. It's that you don't want to, because once you kind of go in the closet, it's kind of, wow, this place is dirty, and it's kind of like that room that you don't let people in your house when you have people around. You kind of throw all the junk in there, and you go, you can see all these rooms, but like, don't go in there, because if you open that door a little bit, then that means like it's a whole hell of a lot of work you've got to do. Like when Tam, when I kind of reached out to you, there was a part of me that was like, I don't know whether to do this, because I don't want to come across as disingenuous. And I could probably say for a lot of people, there is a lot of fear around that as well, of kind of like just people don't want to be seen to be jumping on the bandwagon or doing it just because it looks good, or
that's exactly what one of my friends said. That's exactly what I literally, and obviously, because you're in a hurt place, so it's very hard to sympathize with somebody when you're in a hurt place. But that is exactly what one of my friends said. She's like, I just didn't know what to say, and I just didn't want to say something. I
think the because I mean that's kind of the case for people in a lot of situations. It is that I don't want to come across as disingenuous, so I won't say anything at all. I think the danger lies there, though, is silence is way worse than, because it is then all about you, isn't it? If you're kind of going, I don't want to say anything because I don't want to feel bad, or I don't want this person to think badly of me, and then it's about you then, and it's not about the actual issue at hand. Like if I messaged you and you did think, oh, he's kind of just jumping on the bandwagon, why is he messaging me? It's like, okay, you have the right to think that. And okay, I've been kind of thought of badly for a little bit, but that's got nothing on the current situation. Do you know what I mean?
I guess it's a case then. I guess it's a case of humbling, as in people of the opposite race humbling themselves in regards to, right, okay, like, this might make me feel uncomfortable, but I'm going to humble myself for the greater good. And also then on the other foot of it is the case of the person that's receiving it, so the Black people in that regard, of being kind of aware. Because I did see somebody, I saw one of a friend of a friend, she was like a proper advocate, she was reposting and this, that and the other, and then somebody of colour commented on it and was like, well, the information you're posting isn't correct or blah blah blah, and I was like, whoa, like she's doing something, like I can't,
Yeah.
you know, you've got to learn to pick battles, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because she's being silent, she's not being compliant, and what she's saying might not be 100% accurate, but at least she's doing something. So I do think,
Definitely.
although we've been through a lot and although we've been oppressed, and why should we, there'll be a lot of people that will say, well, why should we have to do anything, because we're, but I
You
think
shouldn't have to do anything, though. That's
I think it depends where your centre is. So from a place of love and kindness, like if you want that for all of humanity, just be nice and kind to people in regards to how they're coming to you and approaching you at the same time. And I think, you know, one of those cliches is love conquers all. And I think if everybody comes from a loving and kind place and you humble yourself in that, we're going to have a nice conversation like the one we're doing, because each and every one of us are doing that right now.
Yeah. I think it's just about kind of becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think just as humans, we're kind of bad at that anyway. And I think it's just one of those things.
It's a British thing as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
And I think like just like even as a parent, like knowing that I really need to deal with my stuff so that I can be the best parent I can. And it's really hard and it's really tough. Like some stuff from my past that, or some mental stuff or whatever, or even kind of taking criticism on you as a parent of going, you know what, you're not quite doing that right.
Yeah.
Instead of like, because the initial response is to get defensive and kind of go, no, and to put that self-preservation. But just to kind of have, like you said, that humbling of just kind of going, you know what, my boy is bigger than my offense, or my little boy is way more important than if I feel really uncomfortable for the next couple of months while I work through this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Guys, that's fantastic, and that was really the next question. Really, you know, how and you guys have answered it. I was going to ask, you know, what lessons can we learn in the conversations that we've had with friends and families? You know, some have been good conversations, some have been a bit more challenging, and in all of that we've been able to learn. And you know, the things I've taken out from what you were just discussing on, you know, coming from a place of love and compassion and trying to understand. You know, and again, we won't have the right answers. We, like Tamika says, we all haven't read 5,000 books on racism, you know. But it's accepting that, and you know, it's one step forward every time. And as long as we're going in that right direction, where we are continuing to have these conversations in a loving environment, and again, being comfortable in the uncomfortable. I think that's what you said, Kyle. You know, that's really practical stuff that we can learn and take forward as we continue to have these conversations, whether it is racism or something, you know, another topic. So that's great, and hopefully, you know, whoever's listening will take some of that away and help them out. And I guess to bring it to a close, there's one more thing we kind of wanted to touch, is a resolution and what that looks like. What do we think that looks like for future generations, for even just people around us? Whether it's you know, what can we do practically in our workspace, in our churches? I know some of us go to church, in our own homes, so families, friends, etc. So maybe we can sort of all have a little input. So I'll probably go around all of you guys, and then and we can share what we think we can take forward ourselves from these discussions. I'll start off with Fumi. What do you think you can take away from this as a sort of a resolution or something practical?
So I think we've kind of had the theme of conversation. It's literally just being able to have that conversation. If you're not sure about something, try and see if you can find a person or a friend that you can have that chat with. I think it's also even just check online, try and do some research. Google is amazing. So I think I've struggled sometimes where like people have posted really quickly on Facebook without trying to educate themselves and just Google something and then post it, and sometimes it's been very, very offensive. And education, I think it needs to be kind of integrated into education. I know some of the governments are working towards that, because it's very much been diluted, even though when you look on a national level, there's so many streets maybe that for example in Scotland, that are named after slave owners, and it's a very present thing for certain people, and as it's part of their name. And even just the perception that of African history and Caribbean history as well, and just nationally, of how even within the Commonwealth, how we used to help each other and support each other, and kind of like the benefits that each bring. So I think a lot of it is education, but I think on a practical level, when you get to work and you see something that's not right, speak about it. If someone says, for example, says something, ask them, what do you mean by that?
Mm.
There are situations where they might be, that I've seen, I don't want to have that black doctor look after me. And if you're in that situation, you can say, why wouldn't you want that person? They're really, really educated. They're more educated than me. Like, if you want them, I don't know why you wouldn't want me. So some things like that, I think, is just it's being an active bystander. You're seeing things happening, but you're stepping in, you're being the change that you want to see. And if you're silent, it's seen as compliant, that you agree that kind of behavior is okay. And sometimes you can just ask someone when they say a statement like, oh, that was a bit weird. What do you actually mean? Can you clarify that for me? So they can actually reflect on what they've said and hopefully maybe change their view or actually engage with their mouth as well, maybe. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for me. Kyle, what about you? What will you take away from this conversation?
To kind of going ahead?
Going ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I think education in schools is a massive one. Just education in schools of Black history and colonial Britain is huge, because I don't remember learning anything. I mean, I was in school a long time ago, but things may have changed slightly, but I don't think so very much. And I just think, I think knowing your history is massive, and just in the identity of people growing up in a country, of going, okay, this is what has happened, and it helps you take grasp of it and kind of going, okay, that was not okay at all, and it doesn't kind of get brushed under the carpet so much. I think that's one of the biggest things. Is I think another thing why when Timika was talking about why aren't other people kind of reaching out, it is sometimes it is literally that if you're just not aware of it, you're not thinking about it, because it's not taught in schools. It isn't spoken about. It's not like the compassionate side isn't kind of promoted in media. So that education of actually what went on, what is currently going on, is massive. I say for my little boy, I want him to know kind of what our country's history is, because it isn't all saviors and bells and whistles. There's a lot of stuff that our country's done that is horrific, and I think that sort of rural Britannia is kind of needs to be phased out, because we kind of ruined a lot of things. We've done a lot of great things, and we do a lot of great things as a country, and I think we should be proud to be British as well, but not to have that stuff, like I said, kind of swept under the carpet I think is a big key moving forward.
No, that's brilliant. Yeah, I think as individuals, we're always encouraged at work or whatever, just self-review, look at what we've done and how we can improve. And I think you're right, as a society, we need to do that as well. And kind of acknowledge that actually not everything that's been done in the past was actually that good or great. Sure, there was some very good stuff, but actually we haven't really looked at some of the not so good stuff, and there's a lot we can learn from that. What about you, Abby? What will you take away from these conversations?
Yeah, I think for me, it's that element of love and compassion for others. You can't condemn someone for something that they don't know, no matter how internally how that makes you feel. It's about understanding another person's story, their journey, where they're coming from, and I mean in every avenue here, because I think just if we add more fuel to the fire, it's only going to uproar it. It's not about letting the fire sort of burn out, though. I think this is something that has to remain at the forefront of people's minds for a very, very long time. I think we're in the best position to educate our children and hopefully, as Fumi said earlier, be the change that you want to see. So children follow what they see, not necessarily what they're told, just how they see you acting. So if you're actively educating yourself, being aware of situations, and sort of treating everyone with that compassion, hopefully that will be what is needed. to have that level of true equality, that this is what is so essential. It needs to happen.
Thank you, Abby. Last but not least, Tamika.
Well, I think like we've raised some really good and interesting points, and we've been very diplomatic in the sense of, you know, there's a lot of people that are ignorant and they're not, you know, they don't have a lot of malicious intent. There are people that are very aware of their actions and that do have malicious intent. You know, I feel like there's certain generations as well that are kind of sort of, more frowned upon, you know, for them to sort of have interracial relationships and things like that. So I definitely think in order to eradicate those types of mindsets as well, that education is completely, I think education in schools, education in the workplace, I think that's needed as a way. And I also think that there should be laws. There's laws against other types of hate crimes, but there doesn't seem to be that many laws in regards to protecting those of Black people. So I think it would be interesting to have, you know, there's certain organisations that will outrightly be opposed to Black people, but that's freedom of speech and they're allowed. But there's also other races where if you were to speak with hate towards them, that would be an initial crime. And I think that hate is hate. And I think that there should be some sort of level playing field in regards to sort of penalising people for speaking. I know it's a bit of a rabbit hole, because then it becomes like, how much are we going to be controlled? How much freedom of speech do we then not have, and things like that. But I think, you know, it might stop people from saying things and jumping on the bandwagon and thinking before they speak, because now there's a lot of freedom for people to be racially discriminative towards people without any kind of sort of reprimands for that. So I definitely think this sort of having a look into sort of laws and penalties for having being racially discriminative would be something that would be great, as well as education. Education is key for everything, isn't it? Law do with that as well. But a resolution just looks to me like somewhere where we can continue on to have these conversations, we can continue on to speak and love, and just come from a good place. As long as everybody comes, I mean, the world is set to divide and conquer anyway, isn't it? It's just what it is. It's money, it's greed, it's all these kinds of things. And I think if we bring it back down to the centre of it, especially COVID, that made us realise everything. Like, you can have all the money in the world, all the cars in the world, it doesn't make a difference, because when you're sat in your home and you're locked in, that doesn't matter. But being kind and loving towards people, that was the only thing that came prevalent during that time. So I think if we just continue on with that foundation and keep talking and having a conversation, and keeping an awareness of it, then we can make a change, because it starts with the families. And like Abby said, it's, you know, it all starts at home. So if somebody's watching this video now and goes, right, okay, that's, you know, I've taken on board, there's certain things that I'm doing, there's certain things that I'm ignorant to, I want to make a change. That seed that's planted in that family can go on and change so many different people in so many different ways. So I think it's just a case of continually having this conversation, and it might not be something massive, but if it changes one family, it changes 10 families, you know, it's a ripple effect. And I think love can carry that. Love would be the boat that sort of ship sails on. Definitely.
That's brilliant. No, thank you all, and thank you, Abby, Fumi, Kyle, Tamika, for your contributions to the purity conversations. That was it really for the first episode or session. I don't know what this is. I don't know what this will become.
We should do parenting. I think we should do parenting nights, because there was quite a few interesting.
I would be well up for that. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we've got another topic then for next time. But yeah, for those who are watching, we thank you for joining us in our discussions and our conversations, and hopefully we'll see each other again in this form. To purity.
Brilliant.
Purity.
Purity.